Imagine this. You are standing alone in the center of a vast, ancient library, the air thick with dust, yet charged with an energy that feels almost alive. Endless rows of shelves stretch beyond your line of sight, groaning under the weight of tomes and scrolls, histories of empires that rose and crumbled, revolutions that sparked hope then morphed into chaos, and countless lives marked by triumph and tragedy. You reach out to touch a faded spine, feeling the texture of a civilization long gone, and suddenly a whisper brushes your ear. Learn from us, or be doomed to repeat our folly. But what if the lessons of history don't arrive as clear commandments? What if they are riddles wrapped in contradictions, demanding more than passive remembrance? Imagine, then, that history is not a guidebook handed to you neatly wrapped in logic, but a mirror, fractured, distorted, and sometimes cruelly revealing. It reflects back not just the patterns of the past, but the very nature of your readiness to change. You stand before it, struggling with a profound paradox. Those same lessons that seem so obvious, so urgent, wield no power over those unwilling to be transformed by them. The feared cycle of repetition begins not because history fails, but because you do. Isn't it unsettling how often you can confront the calamities and mistakes that have scarred humanity for centuries, yet feel as if you remain untouched, a spectator rather than a participant in the dance of evolution? You know about the Great Depression, the rise and fall of tyrannical regimes, the warnings etched into the ruins of fallen civilizations. Still, when similar patterns stir in your own life or in the world around you, you flinch, resist, or retreat. Why? Because to truly learn from history demands more than acknowledgement. It demands transformation, a seismic shift in the very fabric of your being. But what if you are not prepared to transform? Think about it. History is not a static teacher. It changes its language, its symbols, its methods depending on your capacity to hear it. Perhaps the biggest illusion is believing that information alone is enough, knowledge as a shield, a talisman. But if knowledge decouples from your willingness to evolve, it becomes mere noise, lost in the cacophony of everyday distractions. What good are the lessons of past pandemics if you repeat the same errors of denial or complacency? What use is the awareness of systemic oppression if you cling to the narratives that justify it? Can wisdom truly seep into consciousness when the spirit remains rigid, afraid of the unknown? You might ask yourself now, am I ready? Am I willing to surrender the comfort of old beliefs, the solidity of the familiar self, to embrace the uncertainty of change? Because this is the paradox that history throws at you like a gauntlet. The only way forward is a leap into transformation, a letting go of who you thought you were to become who you must be. Without this readiness, the lessons become specters haunting only to terrify, never to teach. What does it mean to be prepared to transform? Is it some grand epiphany, a sudden awakening? Or is it a slow, grueling unraveling of the self, a continuous peeling away of delusions until only raw truth remains? And if transformation is so essential, why does it evoke such resistance, fear, denial, even aggression? Because transformation is death in a way, the death of all that is comfortable. Small death that must happen over and over within you if you are to truly learn. And death, even symbolic, is the great enemy of the ego. But here lies the deeper tension. You are caught between two imperatives. On one hand, the weight of history, the accumulated wisdom etched in sorrow and triumph, pulls you toward change. On the other, your own inner inertia, the gravitational pull of identity and habit, anchors you to the status quo. This collision is not a subtle one. It erupts in moments of crisis, personal, societal, or global, where the old scripts fail spectacularly and the cost of inaction becomes intolerable. Yet, even then, many retreat to denial, clinging to familiar falsehoods rather than embracing the discomfort of transformation. How then do you bridge this yawning chasm? How do you become the kind of person who not only listens to history, but lets it unsettle and reshape you? This question is not academic. It pulses with urgency in every choice you make. Because the grand irony, or perhaps the greatest tragedy, is that history's lessons are not waiting to punish the ignorant. They are waiting to awaken the willing. Picture the cycle again. Civilizations collapse because leaders ignore their warnings. Individuals suffer the same fates emotionally and spiritually when they refuse to evolve. Families, communities, entire nations are entangled in this pattern. Yet within the same breath, history hums with tales of profound renewal, phoenixes rising from ashes, societies reinventing themselves, human beings transcending their limitations against all odds. What separates those who fall into repetition from those who ascend beyond it? Readiness, the quiet but fierce willingness to be transformed no matter how disorienting or painful. This readiness is neither given nor guaranteed. It's an alchemical process, something you must forge within yourself, constantly and deliberately. It's not about passively absorbing information, but about active engagement, challenging your assumptions, dismantling your comfort zones, surrendering to uncertainty. The lessons of history are invitations to dance, sometimes a demanding and unfamiliar choreography that requires trust and courage. Can you hear the rhythm beneath the noise? Beyond the dates and facts lies a pulse that calls you not just to remember but to embody change. This is the essential riddle. History's lessons only guide those who are prepared to transform. If you are not prepared, you will hear only echoes, fragmented warnings that fade into forgetfulness. But if you are ready, even in the smallest way, the past unfolds as a living map, a labyrinth with doors opening into new landscapes of possibility. So ask yourself, what does your readiness look like? What fears stand guard against transformation within you? What would it take to move beyond hesitation and truly embrace the unknown? And more urgently, can you afford not to? Because the alternative is to wander the corridors of history as a ghost trapped in repetition, forever circling the same mistakes with growing despair. The path forward demands more than curiosity. It demands a radical act of will. And in that demand lies both the challenge and the promise. You are at a threshold, an invitation not just to learn but to become what history calls forth in you. But crossing that threshold means something must die and something new must be born. Are you ready to face the unsettling paradox that true learning is inseparable from transformation? As the shadows lengthen in your mind, the whisper returns, now clearer, insistent. To learn is to change. To change is to live beyond the past. And with that, the silence in the library deepens, awaiting your next step. What will you do? You stand at the edge of a chasm, not just a divide between past and future, but a fissure cleaving open the very self you thought you understood. Why is it, then, that the lessons of all those who have walked before you so seldom register as more than faint echoes, dim outlines in a fog of forgetfulness? Why do so many stumble again and again, their histories repeating like a cursed refrain, even as the consequences grow ever more grievous? The answer lies not in the failures of memory, nor lack of information, but in the unseen architecture of the human psyche and the societal conditions that engineer resistance to transformation. Carl Jung, the great explorer of the unconscious, called it the shadow, the reservoir of everything in ourselves we reject, deny, or fail to integrate. Here lies the crux of the problem. History's lessons arrive not as neutral data, but as mirrors reflecting parts of you you may never want to meet. The cruelty of history, then, is that it reveals your shadow, not just the darkness of the world, but the darkness within your own mind. It demands confrontation. Yet, the moment you are invited to look deeper, you instinctively recoil, for to transform is to allow what has been hidden to rise into the light, disrupting the comfortable stories you tell yourself about who you are. Friedrich Nietzsche confronted this anguish head-on with his concept of the eternal recurrence. Imagine being forced to live your life over and over, in every agonizing detail, without change. This thought experiment isn't merely a metaphysical puzzle but a psychological torment, a stark depiction of what failure to transform truly means, an existence trapped in cyclic stagnation. Nietzsche recognized that to break free demands a will to power, not power over others, but the power to confront yourself, to affirm life even through suffering and uncertainty. Yet, this act of radical acceptance and transformation is terrifying because it asks you to reject the convenient, to embrace the unknown and the impermanence within yourself. Arthur Schopenhauer, with his unflinching gaze into human suffering, reminds us of the will's blind force, ceaseless, insatiable, and often destructive. It is this metaphysical will that drives you to cling to past patterns, to seek refuge in familiar narratives, even when they no longer serve. The will demands continuity, identity, and security, sparking resistance against change as a form of self-preservation. But Schopenhauer also reveals the paradox. The will's insistence traps you in a cycle of desire and dissatisfaction, imprisonment within a self that refuses to let go. Here lies the cruel irony. Your very survival instincts conspire against the transformation history calls for. Aldous Huxley's prescient vision adds another layer to this enigma. His dystopias warn of societies engineered to anesthetize, pacify, and control, not through overt tyranny, but through seductive illusions of comfort and stability. In the modern age of information overload and relentless distraction, history's urgent whispers risk being smothered beneath a deluge of noise and superficiality. The contemporary mind, inundated yet starved for meaning, finds it easier to numb itself than to awaken. You become a participant in a passive spectacle where transformation, the labor of deep reflection and confrontation with discomfort, is the price few are willing to pay. Then there is Jean-Paul Sartre, who insisted that existence precedes essence, that you are condemned to freedom, bearing the weight of choice and responsibility. This freedom is no gift, but a burden that can paralyze. To truly learn from history is to recognize your freedom to change course, to reforge your identity not as a fixed essence, but as a becoming. Yet, Sartre also shows the temptation of bad faith, evading freedom through self-deception, denying your capacity for transformation, because it demands the unbearable task of responsibility. You cling to historical patterns because they offer the illusion of security, a pre-written script to perform rather than the open-ended, raw creation of a new self. Viktor Frankl's experience in the abyss of the Holocaust distills this psychological and philosophical challenge into a matter of survival. Frankl discovered that meaning, finding purpose beyond suffering, was the key to transcending even the most horrific repetitions of history. But meaning is not handed down. It must be chosen, forged in the crucible of consciousness willing to face the abyss rather than flee it. Transformation, then, is less a grand epiphany than a continuous act of will born from a confrontation with suffering and loss. Without this act, history's lessons become a torment, a whispering ghost drawing you toward despair. This hidden force, the shadow of the psyche, the blind will, the seduction of comfort, the burden of freedom, and the quest for meaning, shapes every human encounter with history's call. It molds emotions into fear, denial, guilt, or apathy. It shapes identity into a fortress guarding against uncertainty rather than an open laboratory of becoming. And so the lessons of history do not fail because they lack value, but because you are, in many ways, not ready to meet them. The readiness to transform demands tearing down these fortresses, unmasking the illusions, and welcoming the full spectrum of psychic turmoil that transformation entails. Yet, what if the cost of such readiness is higher than you imagined? What if the moment you step toward transformation, you awaken forces within and without that threaten your very sense of self, your place in the world? What deeper consequences lurk beyond the initial shock of facing history's truth? Consequences not just for you, but for the fragile systems of meaning and belonging you inhabit. The tension coils tighter here, a silent pressure building within your chest, demanding a reckoning that will not be postponed. This is why so many recoil, why so many hear history but fail to listen. Because transformation does not merely rewrite your future, it dismantles and reconstructs the foundations of your present identity. It confronts your fears at the core level, exposing the paradox that to live beyond the past, you must first face the part of yourself entwined with it. History's lessons are not lessons at all unless you are willing to become something else in response. And the process is neither linear nor gentle. It is a descent into the unknown, a journey through shadows that threatens to undo before it remakes. So the question remains, how do you reconcile with this internal and external turmoil? How do you prepare for a transformation that shakes the very ground beneath your feet? As the weight of this hidden force presses against you, a deeper urgency emerges. To continue as you are is no longer an option because history accumulates around you like a restless storm, demanding not just acknowledgement but active metamorphosis. And the path to that metamorphosis treads through unyielding terrain, the tangled labyrinth of your own psyche and the turbulent, often hostile, currents of society itself. You are no longer merely a witness to history. You are an agent caught in its relentless unfolding. Within you is the battlefield where past, present, and future collide, where the quiet desperation of old patterns meets the fierce, uncertain hope of becoming. To linger on the threshold is to risk being swallowed by inertia, to fade into the ghostly repetition from which only the prepared can escape. But to cross it, yes, to cross it, means something unrecognizable awaits. And so the silent question presses on. Will you remain locked in the seductive comfort of your current self, or will you answer the deeper call, embrace the difficult unknown, and begin the slow, arduous work of transformation? The shadows lengthen still, and the pulse of history's lesson beats steadily, an unrelenting summons to live beyond the past. You may not see it, but something has already taken root inside you, a silent architect weaving invisible patterns around your thoughts, your perceptions, your sense of what is possible. This architect does not announce itself with fanfare. Instead, it moves like a shadow beneath your skin, steering you with a deftness so subtle you mistake its influence for your own volition. It is the constant repetition of history's whispered lessons, lessons that shape the very matrix of your inner world and the society you inhabit, often without your conscious consent. Have you ever noticed how, time and again, certain narratives insist on returning, fractured yet hauntingly familiar? They ripple through your mind like an undercurrent you cannot quite catch, yet they tug at your decisions, your fears, and your hopes with relentless precision. These echoes aren't merely stories told by the past. They are coded impulses etched deep into your neural pathways by generations before you. They are the cognitive biases seeded through evolution, nurtured and amplified by cultural conditioning, crafting a reality that feels unalterable because it is internalized so thoroughly. Consider this. Your brain is a survival machine honed over millennia to detect patterns, to avoid danger through what it knows. It does not crave novelty, it craves certainty. This craving creates what psychologists call confirmation bias, the irresistible urge to favor information that supports existing beliefs and to dismiss contradictory evidence as an anomaly or outright threat. The cost? A narrowing lens on reality that filters out lessons history desperately tries to impart, ensuring that the same mistakes, the same fractures, repeat with maddening regularity. But there is more at play than cognitive bias alone. Beneath the conscious mind lies a labyrinth of neural circuits wired for habitual response, where the comfort of routine becomes a prison disguised as safety. When you cling to familiar narratives, your brain releases dopamine, the chemical signature of reward, reinforcing the patterns that keep you anchored in the past. Change, with its uncertainty and chaos, disrupts this neurochemical comfort zone, triggering a primal alarm that screams for retreat. Thus, the mind becomes both the guardian and jailer of history's lessons, resisting transformation not out of ignorance, but as a desperate act of self-preservation. Now, extend this intimate struggle beyond the individual and into the collective. Societies are no different than individuals in their vulnerability to these invisible forces. Cultural conditioning operates like an echo chamber, a vortex spinning around shared myths, fears, and desires. These narratives are passed down, not only through words but through rituals, education, systems of power, and symbols imbued with meaning. They create a shared vanguard of biases that blind entire populations, locking them into collective patterns that masquerade as inevitabilities. Imagine the silent force of cultural conditioning acting like a virus. It invades beliefs, festers in social institutions, and mutates subtly over time. It shapes laws, economies, even the architecture of cities, as if all were encoded by an unspoken agreement to repeat history's certainties. Resistance to this collective conditioning feels akin to swimming upstream in a storm, exhausting and fraught with isolation. The familiar narratives become collective hallucinations so powerful that breaking free feels impossible or dangerous, demanding social exile or inner despair. You may feel this tension in your own life, an invisible hand pushing you to conform to roles and ideas inherited from a past you did not choose, yet feel compelled to live out. Your doubts about change, your resistance to transformation, may not stem from personal weakness, but from this vast, silent architecture of history's grip. Every whispered lesson, this is how things are, this is your place, this is what history has shown us, acts like an invisible membrane, straining to contain you within a familiar shape. And this silent shaping is urgent, because the trap tightens with every passing moment, molding your perception of who you are and what your society can become. It breeds complacency, masked as wisdom. It breeds fear, disguised as prudence. It breeds division, camouflaged as tradition. The unconscious acceptance of these forces ensures that history does not teach you. It merely repeats itself, dragging you and those around you into cycles of frustration, violence, and stagnation. Can you feel it? The suffocating weight of this unseen trap pressing against your very sense of possibility. It is not always loud. Sometimes it manifests as a gnawing dissatisfaction or a creeping despair that clouds your vision. Sometimes it disguises itself as cynicism or apathy, convincing you that change is futile or even dangerous. Yet beneath this numbing surface pulses the insistent truth. Without conscious awareness and radical readiness to disrupt these internal and societal defaults, you risk becoming yet another node in history's unbroken chain of repetition. The paradox is cruelly simple. The very things that keep you safe, that make you feel grounded, are often the conditions that imprison you. And yet, recognizing these forces is only the beginning, not the end, of the journey. For knowledge without transformation is like holding a key you refuse to use. The mind's labyrinthine resistance does not dissolve overnight. It demands patience, courage, and above all, a willingness to endure unknowing. How do you break this cycle when the architecture itself is invisible, when the walls confining you are made from the very fabric of your mind and society? The answer is not to fight blindly against the past or to deny the patterns you see. Instead, it requires an intimate reckoning, learning to see the unseen forces shaping you, feeling their weight without succumbing to despair, and beginning the slow process of loosening the chains that bind your consciousness. This is what history requires of you, not passive remembrance, but active transformation. Yet, transformation is no gentle act. It is a violent rebirth that shakes the foundations of who you thought you were. To approach it is to confront the terrifying paradox that the path forward lies through unlearning what you have always known. The walls of your cognitive prison begin to crack only when you acknowledge their existence. Still, you may ask, is escape even possible? Can one truly break free from the deep entanglement of biases, conditioning, and cultural inertia? The truth is layered and unsettling. The maze is formidable and the costs of leaving the familiar behind are real. But the alternative, the slow dissolution of possibility, the endless reenactment of past failures, is a shadow too dark to bear. And so, even as you stand at this crossroads, feeling the silent force shaping your reality with unseen hands, a deeper awareness stirs beneath the surface. It whispers of a possibility not yet fully grasped, a breakthrough waiting beyond resistance. You are poised at the edge of an abyss and a new horizon simultaneously. Yet, to leap requires first the courage to look clearly at the invisible cage and the readiness to dismantle it from within. History's lessons are not handed down like simple truths. They are encrypted in the silent machinery of mind and culture. Only those prepared to see, to feel, and to transform beneath this surface noise will find the guiding light hidden in the depths. The question remains, are you prepared to meet this silent architect, to recognize its power, and to engage in the arduous work of liberation? Because in that work lies the fragile hope of transformation that history ultimately demands. Imagine for a moment that everything you believed about control, progress, and your own place in the unfolding drama of history was deliberately inverted. What if the very notion of mastery, the idea that you can command events, bend circumstances, or will outcomes into existence, is the grandest illusion ever whispered into your mind? What if the true power lies not in resistance but in surrender, not in domination but in radical openness? This is not surrender to defeat, but a paradoxical embracing of force with softness, action with stillness. It is a redefinition so profound, it makes your old certainties tremble and fall like ancient ruins beneath a rising tide. History, with all its brutal clarity and relentless repetition, shows you this radical shift everywhere, if only you have eyes to see. Take the remarkable example of Gandhi, a man who wielded no conventional power, who had no armies, no weapons, and yet orchestrated the collapse of an empire. His secret was a transformation of strategy, a decisive break from the default narratives of violence and conquest. He did not deny the force of the British Empire. He absorbed it and redirected it through the confidence of moral clarity and unwavering nonviolence. He reclaimed control not by fighting the machine on its own terms, but by inventing an entirely new language of resistance. What seemed weak was unbreakable. What seemed passive was explosive. Or consider the Renaissance, not just as a period of artistic flowering, but as a seismic cognitive revolution. The shift wasn't merely in new techniques or discoveries. It was a wholesale reorientation of how humanity understood itself in relation to the cosmos, to knowledge, and to power. To break free from the shackles of medieval dogma demanded more than new facts. It demanded a new mode of seeing, a willingness to question the foundations of reality itself. Those who dared this transformation did not merely learn from history, they rewrote it. What does this mean for you, standing on the precipice between what was and what might be? It means your liberation lies in embracing what you have resisted most fiercely: uncertainty, ambiguity, and the necessity of deep internal change. The lesson whispered by history's greatest breakers is that control is not seized through brute force or linear solutions, but through a profound and deliberate change in consciousness, a shift so fundamental it alters the architecture of your mind. You begin by recognizing that control is never about external circumstances alone. The illusion that you can bend reality to your will without first aligning your inner world with it is the first cage to break. Instead, reclaiming your power starts within, in the ability to hold your contradictions, to endure discomfort without collapsing, and to invite transformation rather than resist it. This is not passive resignation. It's the dynamic act of becoming fluent in the language of flux, learning to dance in the storm rather than cling to the shore. History's lessons become clear only when you stop seeing yourself as a mere spectator or victim of events, and start perceiving yourself as a participant in the ongoing creation of reality. Those who hold this vision do not chase control. They cultivate it by reshaping their beliefs, habits, and even their identity. They understand that transformation demands dismantling familiar mental models, even at the cost of disorientation and vulnerability. The sharp edge of growth is always cutting. Consider the radical mindset of the abolitionists in the 19th century, widely dismissed in their time as hopeless idealists or dangerous radicals. They saw beyond the entrenched systems of oppression that seemed invincible, and they ignited a movement that forced a tectonic shift in society. Their power was not in overwhelming arms or mass violence, but in the relentless refusal to accept the given reality and the courage to envision a world unimagined by their contemporaries. Their transformation was as much internal as external, rooted in an unyielding commitment to moral truth, even when it threatened their safety and sanity. To reclaim control and build a new way of thinking is to immerse yourself in this lineage of radical possibility. It is to understand that history's lessons do not reside in facts or dates, but in the alchemical process of transformation, where the old self dies and a new self is born amid the ruins of certainty. This process is messy, unpredictable, and deeply personal, but it is the very essence of human freedom. Are you ready to shift your paradigm so completely that you stop trying to control the outside world the way you always have? To accept that true mastery involves yielding, listening, and evolving. To see that your greatest power is not opposition but integration, not conquest but creative surrender. This is the revolutionary insight waiting beneath the surface turmoil, a power that has shaped giants and reshaped civilizations, but demands from you the courage to embrace discomfort, to relinquish outdated identities, and to leap into the unknown with both eyes wide open. In that leap lies a profound reclaiming of agency, a move from being shaped by history to shaping history itself. And here is the most radical truth of all. This power is not reserved for the few. It is embedded in your capacity to transform your relationship with yourself and the world. The lessons of history are only roadmaps. The true journey is yours to walk with fearless curiosity, radical openness, and the unshakable belief that transformation is not a gift to be waited upon, but a choice to be made. You stand now before a mirror, reflecting not the past you have known, but the potential to re-envision yourself as a creator of new realities. The question is no longer how to escape the confines of history's patterns, but how to commit to the inner revolution that makes escape possible. It is a call that has echoed through the ages, soft, persistent, and clear. Will you answer? Look deeper, beyond the surface of your turmoil, beyond the weariness of repeated patterns. There lies a truth so profound it bends the very fabric of your understanding of time, self, and history itself. What if every moment you have lived, every pain you've endured, every failure and seeming misstep was never a trap or a prison but a signal, an invitation encoded in the very DNA of your experience? What if the lessons you sought in history, the wisdom you hope to extract from the ruins of civilizations and the ashes of your own inner battles, were never meant to be trophies of knowledge but catalysts for metamorphosis? You have been looking at history as a distant teacher, an external judge handing down verdicts on the world's follies. Yet, here is the unsettling truth. History is not a linear script imposed upon you from the outside. It is a living, breathing dialogue between your past selves and the selves you have not yet dared to become. The stories you tell yourself about who you are, about what is possible and what is inevitable, are stitched from the same cloth as the grand narratives that have shaped humanity's rise and collapse. The paradox is staggering. The chain that binds you is forged from the very lessons that could set you free, if only you learn to wield them not as shields but as keys. Imagine the architecture of your consciousness as a vast cathedral, every thought and memory a pillar, every emotion a stained glass window casting fractured light. The history you carry within is the foundation, cracked, weathered, but undeniably present. To embrace transformation is not to demolish this cathedral, but to enter its hidden chambers and awaken dormant forces, to allow the dust to settle and see what sculptures of possibility emerge in the shadows. You come to understand that transformation is not a destination, but an unending spiral, an alchemical process of dissolving and recombining, where your past is neither enemy nor idol, but the raw material for reinvention. Here is the paradigm shift you have been waiting for. The lessons of history do not exist to constrain you, but to expand your capacity to become. Your struggles were never punishments but preparatory fires, designed not to break you, but to temper you into something new. Each repetition, each cycle of defeat or despair, is a fractal echo inviting you to evolve, if and only if you've grasped the sacred tension between acceptance and agency. To resist this tension is to remain trapped in a loop, to fight the waves instead of learning to surf them, to clutch at the past even as it dissolves like mist. When you finally surrender the illusion that your identity is fixed, that your story is predetermined, something remarkable happens. The boundary between past and future blur, and time itself becomes a malleable dimension. You awaken to the possibility that your life is not a static narrative written in stone, but a dynamic canvas, constantly repainted with every choice, every act of courage in the face of uncertainty. The wisdom engraved in history's long arc is not a set of rules but an invitation to co-create, a permission slip to step beyond spectatorhood and become an alchemist of your own fate. Consider the artists who have reinvented eras, the visionaries who turned chaos into a new order. They did not merely learn from history, they transmuted it. They let the failures and triumphs of the past seep into their bones, disrupting comfortable identities, forcing uncomfortable reckonings. They surrendered old certainties to birth new paradigms. Their legacy is not just in monuments or texts, but in the invisible shifts of consciousness that ripple through generations. These shifts begin inside you. The real revolution is interior, a reclamation of your role as both witness and author of history. You are no longer condemned to repeat, you are invited to rewrite. But this rewriting demands more than willpower. It requires a radical openness to dismantle the self you think you know, to sit with the discomfort of disorientation, to walk willingly into the unknown with the trembling desire to become more than you have ever been. It is an act of profound vulnerability, because to embrace transformation is to acknowledge that the story you cling to is incomplete, that your identity is a story still being told, and that you hold the pen. Look again into the mirror. This time, do not seek a reflection of what was or what might be, but peer into the depths where your true power resides. The power to transform suffering into insight, limitation into possibility, history into prophecy. This alchemical leap is the essence of freedom. It demands from you not certainty, but courage, not escape, but engagement. It asks you to say yes to the paradox of becoming, that to be whole, you must first be broken open, that to grasp the future, you must release the past, that to create, you must submit to the mystery of change. As the echoes of history reverberate within and around you, listen closely. They are no longer distant lessons but living whispers, urging you forward into the rawness of transformation. The path may be treacherous, the night long, but the dawn holds a revelation unlike any you have known, that every fragment of your history waits not to imprison you but to empower you. That every scar, every failure, every moment of despair is a secret seed of becoming. That the only true tragedy is to remain unmoved, unchanged, untouched by the fierce grace of transformation. Stand now at the edge of this sacred precipice. The abyss before you is not a void but a portal. The question is no longer what history will teach you, but what you will teach history and yourself by choosing to embrace the unknown with open heart and unyielding resolve. To transform is to become a living testament to the power of radical becoming, a beacon for those who will follow, a declaration that the lessons of history are not chains but wings. So choose. Choose to become a conduit of transformation, a weaver of new realities born not from denial but from the raw, unfiltered embrace of your entire being. To do so is to step into a narrative greater than yourself, a narrative where history's harshest lessons become the seeds of a luminous future. And in that moment, when you fully embody this truth, the past will no longer haunt you, it will empower you. The world will not only watch but awaken, and you will know that the greatest revolution is the one you ignite within. Will you answer the call?